first learnt about cameras. But there are just three things that I have to understand first: ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. And after that, I can think of other things. Now, I don't think it's the best place right now. Like we are having a lot of stuff being done at home. So probably what we'll do is we'll go to the office. Okay. Let's go. Okay guys, so I hope you enjoyed the city a little bit. Now we are there, we are here in the school. We are in the library. So let me now take a moment to explain you the whole setup. And after that, we are going to delve into the Trinity. Okay. The first thing is, I want to tell you that outside there's sun. And as much as I would like to open the window, the reason why we are not opening is so that the light remains constant, because we are going to talk about ISO, and then we cannot just change ISO. Okay, the second thing is we have a subject here. Okay, so say hi to Sarah. Okay, now what we are going to see here is a foreground. We have the subject, we have the background here. The background is a library, so you can focus on the books, what is written here, as well as there is an artificial light which you can see. Okay, and then behind that there's a background. The background is a couple of chairs in the other room, which is also lit. Okay, now all of this we are going to explain in a very different way. What is that? We are not going to just use photographs. We are not just going to click pictures of this setup with different values of ISO, aperture, as well as shutter speed. What we are going to do is we are going to take a continuous video stream. The reason being, like we are living in this world where videos are becoming easier and easier to use, and we all are going to use some sort of video. So we need to understand also that how does the Trinity affect the videos. So we are going to do both. We are going to have the whole video, as well as we are going to take some small snapshots of it within the video itself, so that you get a perspective of both how the video continually changes as well as the photos. Okay, so now let's delve into our Trinity. Now my first question is, what is the ISO right now? What is the shutter speed, and what is the aperture? Now the reason why I'm asking you this is because you are seeing everything in the stream that you are right now watching of Sarah, and I hope that you'll be able to answer this question at the end of this video. And this is what the aim is, that if you understand the concept of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, and how they are related to each other, given the lighting conditions here that you have, you should be able to give an approximate understanding of what the values are by the end. And I will give you the answer at the end of the video. Okay, so let's jump in here. Okay, now I'm not going to take some very extremely difficult way of explaining things, because I've been teaching for like 15 years now, and I know the best way is to talk about it in the simplest way possible. So we are going to start with ISO because it's the simple thing to understand. Then we are going to move to shutter speed and then to aperture. Okay, now talking about ISO, what is ISO? ISO is the light inside the camera. Now before we understand that, think about it. Everything is real terms. Imagine you are walking outside in sunlight, and then you just go inside a building, inside a shade where the light is lesser. What happens? At the start, for this few seconds you don't see much, but then slowly you start looking at things better. Why so? Because ISO is also in your eyes. Your eyes have an ISO of 1 to 800. That means when you are in outside sunlight, the ISO is 1 because it doesn't need extra light from inside. Okay, so the ISO is 1. As soon as you go inside, the eyes start increasing the ISO because the external light is less. So it gives you the artificial light from inside you, and then you can see things. Okay, this is what the camera can do. The camera can actually go to much beyond 800. It can go to like 20,000, 30,000, okay, depending on the camera. So that means you can see everything using a camera in a place where you cannot see anything with eyes. Okay, but now my next question is, what happens when you increase the ISO? The same thing that happens to your eyes, the same thing happens here. Imagine you take a flower and you look at this flower outside in a lot of light, in ample amount of natural light. You can see all the details of this flower. Okay, but when you go inside, at the same time what happens is you can see the details but not very well. That's what happens here, that if I increase the ISO, then the image quality is not going to be as good. Okay, so we are going to understand everything basis these values, the aperture value of 3.5, okay, then our shutter speed of 1/50 and our ISO of 640. Okay, the reason why we're going to take these values is because in general f3.5 is the maximum aperture of any kit lens. Okay, 1/50 because I'm right now shooting at 24 fps, so the correct shutter speed should be 1/50, and finally the ISO 640, which is correct for this particular setup. I can even go to 800, but it's okay. 640, 800 is more or less the same right now here. Okay, now of course, if you don't understand what is this aperture, shutter speed, and don't worry, this is what exactly we are going to study. But just to remember, the first picture, the base picture we are going to take is shutter 150, aperture 3.5 and ISO 640. Okay, so now let's see some practical aspects of ISO. So we have 150 shutter, 3.5 aperture. We are going to keep them fixed. We are just going to play with ISO and let's see what happens. Right now ISO is 640. What if I make ISO as the minimum possible, which is 110, now 100. Okay. So what's happening is the light is reducing. I increase 125, 160 and I continue increasing 640, 800 and blah blah blah. And the maximum ISO in this camera is 12,800 and you see it's completely white, everything. Okay. Okay, so let's come back here to our original, which was, okay, so come back to original, which is 640. Now, the other thing which I said was about the noise in the picture. So let's take one example where I'll keep the ISO as 100 and I'll try to get the light sort of similar by changing some of the values. Okay. At this point, we'll take a picture which is shutter of 140, f1.2 and ISO 100. And then we are going to compare this image to the highest ISO that I can have. And then again come back to the similar light. Okay, so we have the shutter of 1/125, f is 10 and the ISO is 12,800. Don't worry about the f values and the shutter speed. Right now we just have to see that they are similar brightness but with completely different values of ISO, and here we will check what is the difference in the noise. Okay, so at this point you would realize that whenever we increase the ISO, the noise is immense. Okay, so that means the first thing, as much as possible, keep the ISO as less as possible. If your camera is very good, probably you can have a good image till like 3200 ISO. But if your camera is okay, go till like 640, 800 ISO. Don't go beyond that. It's not going to look that great. But of course, if you're just going to shoot it for Instagram, no one is going to see the picture in a very big, huge format. So it's okay even if you go till 3200 with a not so great camera. Okay, now you will notice a lot of things, a lot of lights, the artificial light moving in a certain way. What is that? That is because of the shutter speed. So that's your next topic, our shutter speed. So shutter speed basically is how fast the shutter closes. Okay, so imagine if the shutter closes very fast, the amount of light that comes is going to be very less. So if the shutter is closing very fast, that means 1/4000, the maximum that we can go. That means it is going to capture very less light. That is one concept of shutter speed. And instead, if you have for 30 seconds, that means it will capture a lot of light. Okay, that is one concept of shutter speed. The second is, if it captures very fast, then it can also basically capture a fast moving object. So for example, in sports, you have to capture the shutter speed. Your shutter speed should be very fast. Okay, and instead for night photography, you can have for 30 seconds. Why? Because one, the objects are not moving very fast, because in 30 seconds the moon is not going to go from one side to the other side. Okay, and the second thing is you need a lot of light. The first time I went for night photography, I saw nothing in the sky, but the camera was able to see a lot of things because my shutter speed was 30 seconds. So for 30 seconds it let all the light come, and then everything was like amazingly bright, the Milky Way. Okay, so let's take a couple of examples. First thing about brightness. Right now we are at where we left off before, ISO 12800 f10, and shutter is 1/125. Now if I start making the shutter faster, that means I start increasing 1/320, or 1/1000, 1/1250, 1/4000. So you see, everything is dark because of the brightness concept. Of course, if I go on the other way, the same thing will happen. Right now my shutter is 1 second, just once, no, not even 1 second, 1/8 second. It doesn't go because it's already too bright. Okay, now that was the brightness concept. Now understand the other concept about how fast it is. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to reduce the ISO. We don't need such a high ISO here. We'll go to 640, our original. We'll go our f as 3.5, and now our shutter is let's say 1/50. So right now you are going to see what you will see with your naked eye. So I'll ask Sarah to wave. Okay, continuous wave. No, not very fast, a little faster. Okay, so this is what you see normally. Okay, and we'll take a snapshot of it. Now what happens if I increase the shutter? I increase the shutter speed to 1/2000, and to balance the light, I'm going to increase the ISO now to 6000, no, to 10,000, and a little more light I'll use with aperture as 1.8. Okay, so you can increase the speed of your hand. So I can still see all her hand. I can see that the light, there is a blink happening in the lights, the natural lights here. I can actually notice all of them. Why? Because the shutter is so fast. It's basically 1/2000th times. It can blink 2000 times in 1 second. Okay, the shutter. So that's why it is taking every small movement that is happening. Okay, you can leave it now. Now we're going to talk about aperture. Aperture is probably one of the most sexy aspects of photography. I'll tell you why. But let's again divide aperture into two things. One is the light, because every time there is a concept of light. Photography is about light. Aperture means how big the lens is open. Okay, how big your eyes are open. That's your aperture. Okay, so if it is open a lot, that means a lot of light comes. Now understand, this is inversely proportional. This is where a lot of confusion happens in the numbers that you see here. Aperture is completely open, means the f-stop value is less. In this case, we can go 1.2 is the least. That means it's completely open. A lot of light will go. Okay. Instead, in this particular lens, the aperture, I can reduce it. So basically, when I close it, it becomes f16. Okay. So at that time, less light is going to come. That is the first concept of aperture, about the light. And now the second concept is the depth of field. What is the depth of field? When I say that the aperture value is less, so imagine the aperture value is 1.2. So that means my camera already knows that the subject is Sarah. So it's probably this much. So it just focuses on Sarah. It will not focus on the foreground. That's the reason why we have all of this right now. It will not focus on this. It will not focus on this. Everything is going to be blurred. And more the distance from Sarah, more the blur. So now let's put all of these things into practice. We'll start with our previous values. The shutter speed is 1/2000, the f is 1.8, and ISO is 10,000. Okay, let's just open the aperture, which means f-stop reduces. It goes to 1.2. You see that light increased. If I keep reducing the increasing the f-stop, that means let's go to f13, f16. Everything is dark, and you see some light movement happening there. Okay, now, so let's go back to something where you can see Sarah. Okay, so at 1.8 you can see Sarah. Now we'll talk about the other thing, which was the blur. Okay, let's take the shutter speed to a level which is something. Okay, now let's take the shutter speed to 150, which is what we see with our eyes normally. Let's take the ISO as 400, and you can see this image of Sarah, 320. Okay, and now I'm going to reduce the f-stop value to 1.2, and I'll reduce the ISO to 160. Now at this point, focus on Sarah and focus on this plant that you have. The plant is really blurred. The chairs at the back are really blurred, and then you see that whatever the mid-ground that you have, the books behind her, that's also quite blurred. Okay, instead I try to keep sort of similar light, although I increase the f-stop. So you see I'm increasing the f-stop, it's becoming dark. Now we are at the end of the lesson, so we understand all of these things. I'm going to increase the ISO. I'll continue increasing ISO, light is increasing. Okay, so we are at a good enough place. And now you can see everything. You can see the plant very clearly. You can see everything in the other room. That's because the aperture value is 16. So that means it's very less, but the depth of field is there. It's infinite. So it captures everything. Okay. So basically, if you are in landscape photography, you are going to do that. You'll have f as less as possible. Better is around 11 or 12. And if you are in portrait photography, you're going to say, okay, Sarah, you focus here and you keep your f-stop values as less as possible so that it gives you that sexy blur behind. Now, we'll go back to the question that I asked you at the start of the video when we were here. What were the values of the ISO, the f values, as well as the shutter speed at the start? So that's it for this video. I hope you understood the whole principle of Trinity and how they are interlinked, the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. If you have any doubts, of course, please feel free to write in the comment section. And I really hope that you enjoyed the fact that we use the video here so that you can get a real-time perspective of the changes. And as much as I would like to explain so much more, all the things that I know, I think there's a time when we have to stop. You have to absorb all the concepts, and then we will always talk about some things more in depth. So please subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and like this video if you liked anything here, and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye guys.
Bye-bye.